Ziolo. I'm the president and founder of Zinc Marketing. I'm about to kick off, or we're kicking off a new series today that I've been discussing with my friend and colleague Peter Meyers from Portage Sales, and we're calling it "Bridging the Sales and Marketing Divide." And we've been doing some posts on LinkedIn where we've asked for your input on what you see as some of the gaps and what you're seeing as some of the potential solutions. But we're going to have a conversation and tackle the top ones in our poll, kind of what we see, what the marketing perspective is from my side, what the sales perspective is from Peter's, and then we'll discuss how to solve for them. So the first one and one of the top ranking issues in our poll was the mismatched sales and marketing messages that customers seem to get. But before I kind of give you a bit more intro, maybe Peter, if you could introduce yourself and give us a bit of background, and then we'll kick this one off since it's one of our first ones.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited. Thanks, Brendan. I'm Peter Meyers. So I'm the president and founder of Portage Sales, and we do sales enablement for scale-up companies. This issue comes up all the time in terms of the great divide between sales and marketing. And of course, I really bring a sales hat to this conversation, both having been a sales leader for much of my career, but also working with so many different sales leaders and founders focused on the sales side, and having that perspective. I'm just really excited to have this conversation and to build off of the great input that we got from all of you.
Okay. Yeah, so let's kick this messaging session off and see if we can figure out why sales and marketing just quite often don't speak the same language to the customers and prospects. From the marketing side, I see marketing teams. I run workshops. They spend a lot of time, building out product positioning, value propositions, researching competitors to make sure they have clear differentiators, and then packaging it up into boilerplate and elevator pitches and presentations and all this good stuff. And then they sit back and see the sales team use totally different content, totally different material, totally different messages. So it should be interesting to have this conversation around why two groups within the same company sound like they're representing two totally different companies with totally different solutions some days. So, again, to your point, Peter, looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully we shed some light on this to our audience.
Great.
So let me kick off kind of the marketing view here. And Peter, I'm sure you're not going to fully agree with me, so this could be interesting. But from when I approach this, and I do a lot of work with clients today, I obviously did this when I was on the other side with both startup companies, more established ones. In my mind, simple, differentiated, and consistent message is really core to the brand. You want to reinforce that wherever possible. You want the entire organization pulling together. And to get there, there's, several key questions that, marketers ask throughout the organization and try and understand, so they can translate it for the customers around, what do you do? How do you help the customers? What differentiates you? Why should they choose you, etc.? And, marketers spend a lot of time making sure the messaging hits these key attributes like, no jargon. Now, I'll be honest, marketers aren't always good at that, but they try. Honestly, they try.
We could already shoot in on that one.
Yeah.
I think that's probably one of the biggest complaints of salespeople is it feels too much like the website, not enough like a conversation.
Yeah, and fair point. Like I said, it's obviously still creeps in there, but they do try in many cases.
Yeah.
Again, I'll put this in the same bucket as trying, not always delivered on, but using the language of the customer. Quite often when I start these exercises, you can see examples all over the place where all the messaging is about the company, about them, where it really needs to be about the buyer, their problems, how you solve them, what their needs are, and things like that. And then the other thing too, which is always the part that's the most fun in my workshops, is the differentiation piece, right? You come up with all these great terms, you come up with all these great concepts. Sometimes you're too clever. Sometimes you're just clever enough, but then you go out and it's exactly the same as competitor A is using, or competitor B is using two of those. And, you get into this whole, but they don't do that and we do. But from a customer perspective, that doesn't matter, right? It's all about perception. It's not about reality, especially in the early days. And then the other part that I know marketers struggle with, because they're just as likely to do it, but this divide between sales and marketing really reinforces this, is just the consistent use of it. So you can't be changing it frequently. You can't be using something different with everyone. Now, don't get me wrong. You should be customizing your messaging and pitch to the audience, to the stage of the journey you're talking to them, and all those things. But foundationally, it's still built on the same pieces. And that's something that, when sales is saying one thing, marketing's pushing something else, that disconnect becomes even more obvious, because, it happens within the organization altogether. I know there's frameworks out there, and I know marketers, there's a bunch of different ones, and marketers spend a lot of time with them. But yeah, how do we, get sales involvement in that process so we can come up with better messaging that resonates? I don't know if you disagree with all of that, some of that, or if any of that resonates. But I think that's, kind of the marketing perspective I've seen and heard. They're trying their best, building it on what they know, but they need some help and support as well.
Yeah, no, I think they really do. And I think sales, like I'll throw it up front, Brendan, that I think sales in a lot of ways fails on the feedback mechanism in terms of actually putting the energy into it. I think I want to bring us like from a sales perspective. I think in sales, we live in a different context, I think, than the marketing in some ways, and the marketing group. And I think that leads to some of the gaps in that divide. So, there is a natural mechanism for salespeople to live and breathe in the customer conversations, because that's what we do. And so I do think that there's I know from the sales side, there's a concern that marketing lives too much in an echo chamber inside the company, and that salespeople, of course, are into having ideally several conversations with customers a day, or, whether that's existing accounts or new prospects. And I think that is a natural built-in structure or for fulfillment, for success, in terms of salespeople staying anchored back to like what's going to be practical and pragmatic. When I listen to I'm not surprised by anything of what you shared. I think there is like when we get down to, hey, what makes a great message, for example, it's not like they're completely different lists, but from a sales side, I think there's right away, like top of the list is it's got to exist in customer feedback, meaning that it's got to be sensitive to, responsive to, and modified based on the ongoing actual customer feedback that you get in conversations. That it's got to be sensitive to the different segments I talk to too. Like, all my customers are not created the same. I know in our business, like, for example, two very different types of customers: of the sales leader at a SaaS scale up versus the sales leader at a large industrial distribution business. Very, very different segment and different messaging in that. I think having the messaging as well sensitive to those different stages through the sales process. So I do think that there's, like, it's not like, yeah, of course, we don't want jargon either. And I think there's a lot of things we can line up on. I think it's a different perspective that we bring to the table that, ironically can either, be, create more and more of a divide on one side, I believe, or it can be a huge benefit. Like, if you can get these guys pulling together, like the sales and marketing, boy, like you and I have both seen that once in a while, where, from a messaging perspective, that sales and marketing are working hand in hand. And that starts to create some real magic. So there is a nice kind of golden flip side to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think your echo chamber comment really resonated with me, because I've seen it. I've probably participated in it, whether I realized it or not at the time, right? But that's totally true, that some marketers really get bogged down, and it's a very internal perspective, and it's feedback from within the company. But really good marketers, or marketers that are successful, or ones that have done this for a while, I think realize that and start to move past that, right? It's,
Yeah.
they know they need to get out there. I've always, I've always welcomed the opportunity to go to trade shows, right? I mean, they're difficult, they're a slog, they're not always a party like everyone thinks they are, but you're talking to customers and prospects, and it's always good to get that perspective and energized by that feedback. And I think, getting sales to let the marketing people tag along or get that perspective more often, so it's not just a trade show, because obviously that's a limited set or a specific set of the customers out there. But yeah, it's, getting that input, getting that feedback, and getting out of that echo chamber. So, don't disagree with that comment whatsoever, but yeah, that's a big one to solve for.
And building on that, I I had a good fortune of working with an excellent marketer. I was head of sales, smallish company, and the marketer. What I found with him was that he was willing to go to the trade shows. We actually really interviewed a whole bunch of customers at those trade shows, side by side, debriefed each time. Like, talk about alignment. It was incredible. I saw this guy also take like lead salespeople aside, understand better what was in their pipeline and how to better serve them from a campaign perspective, how to leverage that messaging in as well. So I think it can be done. It takes a willingness, but it takes a willingness on both sides. I believe. The Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to just share a story as well. Like the VP of sales I was closest to at a startup, it was, we definitely did the trade show thing like you said, but we
Yeah.
also would, have the informal lunches, right? So, no customer, no other people. We'd, go grab a burger or we'd grab a beer after work, and, we'd talk about other things, baseball in our example, but we covered other things as well. I mean, I'm not sure, to be honest, we ever had a deep messaging conversation over beer, but we definitely talked about some of the other gaps that we're going to cover in this series. But even just anecdotal things. I was at a customer today, they asked X. I
Yeah.
was at a customer today, I said Y, and they
Yeah.
said all the competitors did it. I thought you said it was a differentiator, right? So it's a lot of these off the cuff informal feedback mechanisms that are absolutely crucial, right? Not just for this messaging divide, but probably every divide we're going to talk about.
I did have a question for you, just a point of view. I have a point of view that I'm a big face-to-face person. I actually believe that face-to-face can be a huge difference maker in people's communication with each other. I know that something like 93% of communication is nonverbal. It's not about the words, it's tone and body language. You and I get a little bit of that right now virtually, and we all do. And this is the world we live in. I think this divide's gotten worse. Like, I think that it's in the last, well, I guess 4 years, almost to the day. It's gotten worse and more, I say, complicated in terms of you actually really have to color outside of the lines to bridge that, to make sure you're having that kind of, as you say, a lunch together or networking. Or it's tougher it's unnatural in some ways to say, yeah, let's both grab a drink or grab our lunch and we'll have it. Well, you do that, that's great, but it's not the same as face to face.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I know there's arguments on both sides of hybrid work, and let's not go down that rat hole today.
No, no, yeah.
That could be the next series.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally agree. And like any of the close relationships I can think of with sales leaders was, we were in the same office in
Yeah.
most cases, or at the very least, there was like quarterly reviews where everyone was together again. But to your point, it was always face to face. And clearly, I'm dating myself because that all sounds like it happened before COVID, which is the case. And I know that's changed a lot of things. But yeah, I think that ongoing face to face informal feedback is just crucial across the board here, and part of what we want to cover here across this series. But maybe Peter, it makes sense if we outline maybe some specific insights or tips or to do here on how we've seen this solved for. And off the top of my head, and then I'll get you to jump in and add or disagree. But the one thing that just blows my mind, I've talked about workshops and frameworks and all this kind of stuff, and you
Mm,
know why is it sales just has to be in the room for that, right?
yeah.
Both, and I don't mean literally to our previous point, but that
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, just why would you do a messaging exercise without them? But I'm sure there's a large number that are done that way, right? So to me,
Yeah.
one of the simple checks is if you're doing a messaging workshop and all of them say, you don't want 20 people in the room. Well, after the marketing one or two people, it's got to be one or two salespeople.
Right.
Is the simple answer to that. I just don't know who else you need there. I mean, you probably need execs and product, but if sales is missing, you should postpone or rethink what you're doing. So to me, that's tip or step one in any of this message development.
Yeah, I think from a sales perspective, my tip to sales leaders and salespeople is do what you do best, which is network, network, network. Kind of to your point around having a lunch with your counterpart to start to bond with, and not just with the leader in marketing, but actually the people that are doing the work as well within that team. Spend the time, bond, talk about some of the challenges, be open, and as you say, build, like, you don't have to make it a messaging conversation every time to have it actually be really helpful for the messaging. Like, just by sharing context, understanding what are some of the challenges on both sides, bridging some of that, I think starts to make both sides a lot more effective. But in particular, as a salesperson, boy, it can really fire up in terms of, like, tear down all the formal stuff when you have a lot of people in a room and just talk one on one, but take the time to do that. I know it takes you off the road. I know it takes you out of the, the those golden hours of selling time. And I believe it's critical for you to, hit that power pill, like power up the what marketing's feeding back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing I've seen done, and I was part of this, and not directly a messaging workshop, but it was a very cool exercise one time we did, where we each of the groups got together. So this was a mix of sales and marketing. There were other groups involved as well. I can't remember who all was involved, but we basically, had these scenarios. You're selling X to this persona or this type of company, and they built the pitch together,
Right.
type thing. So it's a bit more of a detail than maybe what we were talking about here initially, but it was, bringing them together. I mean, it built relationships, to your point in the networking part, but you kind of got a feel for it. So even if you were doing one scenario and your day job was another scenario, I still think you got stuff out of it. And, there was some cool and different angles taken there, which were interesting. But just that build the pitch together, or, I always say, let's practice the pitch together, right?
Yeah.
So when marketing does the messaging and builds out the slides, pitch it, present it to sales, have sales present it to you, see how everyone's handling it. Cause, you may not be as far apart as you think,
Yeah.
and B, you're going to learn stuff from that because everyone's going to interpret words and diagrams and images slightly differently. But through that exchange, I think you would learn a lot. So to me, it's like, you don't want to do this in front of a customer, but why not practice the pitch on Friday afternoon to each other,
Yeah.
type thing? And,
Yeah.
sales would be able to give a lot of feedback because they're used to what the customer is going to grill you on. And, marketing could also give some background on why they chose certain directions in that structure.
Yeah, and I guess my last point will be building off of that, Brendan, which is, as a marketer, my tip to marketers would be, don't assume that just sales just gets it the first time you share it with them. It actually takes a bit, the sales conversation with customers, you are on the hot seat. You need to feel confident about the messaging. You got to know what's actually behind it too, and be able to handle some of the objections, handle some of the, type moments from customers if they're reacting that way, so they can go a little bit that extra layer deep. And I think that does come down to practice and confidence. Giving salespeople, don't just assume because they're confident, like they come off as confident and extroverted, or however they come off. Don't assume that they get it right away. And if you really want your messaging to get out there in the field, you actually need to work with them, support them um, to build that confidence and be able to communicate it more effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last thing I would add is, I don't want to make this a big drawn out process when you're doing the messaging, because clearly you want to continue to optimize it and evolve it and stuff. But I do feel, similar to getting sales involved early on in the process, you kind of do want a sign off phase, right? With
Right.
sales involvement too, because the messaging is going to go through a number of layers of approval and checks and all that kind of stuff. So what's the harm in adding an extra person to that process and an extra bit of time?
Yeah.
Because, if someone hasn't seen it and been involved in the development and approval of it, then I don't doubt they're not going to use it. So
Yeah.
just, getting them to look at it, getting their feedback early, and obviously ongoing too. But at least let's get the feedback and sign off at that first step.
Great. Yeah. No, I think it's a good list and a worthy one to work on for both sides.
Okay. Well, I think we're at the 20-minute mark or so, which we don't want to make these super long, but
Yeah.
we wanted to thank everyone for listening. Obviously, if you have any thoughts, feedback, questions on these, Peter and I are both on LinkedIn. My email is Brendan at zincmarketing.com, and Peter's is.
Yeah. Peter at Portage Sales, excuse me.com.
So yeah, definitely reach out with any questions, feedback, thoughts, and hopefully you found this valuable, and stay tuned for our next episode.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.